Alright, I have a couple of things that I need to say before we get into the video, alright? So, first thing is this. If you saw the thumbnail, yes, it is a crappy looking thumbnail, alright? Feel free to laugh at it as much as you want. I will take it and I will completely understand. Yes, it is a very terrible, and awful thumbnail. So, yes, alright? Second thing, okay? So this will be another Luffy versus Nami video, and to basically sum it up, if you have a sword, you're automatically Team Nami, alright? If you have an axe, you are Team Luffy. Unfortunately, I do not have an axe at all, but I do have a sword, so that makes me Team Nami, alright? So I'm sorry, but that's the way it works, alright? If you have a sword, you are automatically Team Nami, alright? But if you actually have an axe, then you are Team Luffy, alright? Congratulations, alright? There's no switching sides, that's the way it goes. I'm sorry, but end of story. Goodbye, the end, alright? Man, that was such a sad story, right? I'm literally crying tears, people. I'm literally crying tears. Okay. Let's just put this away so no one gets hurt. Alright. Yes, this is going to be another Luffy versus Nami video. I made like 4 of these in the past and stuff like that. I'm actually sort of like doing this again, and it's sort of going to be like the same video, but a little bit more updated, right? That it might actually include a few more things in general like that, and plus a new idea on when do I actually think a Luffy versus Nami fight might actually occur, okay? Now, originally, when I first established this and went over it beforehand, one of my original ideas for a chapter or like the chapter number on when I can actually see this was originally 1322. That was my original proposal, right? And I would still like to keep that as sort of like an idea. Yeah, I don't necessarily want to cancel that out or like forget about it. So I think it's still important to actually keep that in there. But I would like to also suggest that maybe I have another idea on when they can actually fight, and it can basically come in a little bit beforehand, okay? And the reason, and to basically sum it up, going over it, right, I decided to, so maybe it'd be best if I sort of go through this, okay? So, in my previous videos that I talked about with the Luffy versus Nami fights, alright? When I first talked about these beforehand, I was looking at the fights that Luffy had with his other East Blue crew members and stuff like that, alright? Every single one of the East Blue crew members, Luffy has had a dedicated fight, alright? Now, he's also had fights with Frankie and even Jinbei and stuff like that, but one thing's for sure is that there's always been something that's led to a fight with Luffy and his East Blue crew, right? So I think it could be very interesting if something could actually occur with Nami in this sense. Now, I want to be very clear here before I really get into the video, right? Because this is probably something I need to spell, okay? I don't want the fight to necessarily just be Luffy just punching Nami for no specific reason, right? That is not to be stated, right? I don't want that to happen, and Luffy should never be doing that, and I don't think Oda's going to do that as well, right? No, I do believe that a fight could actually occur, but I think there could be more of like more of a sympathetical reason, or more of like an understanding reasons like that why these two are basically being forced to go up against each other, and you kind of got to feel for the pain that it's something that you sort of got to feel for the pain and understand, like, there's a reason for why they're fighting, but it's not something that is for no personal or for no reason at all, okay? Alright. So, originally, one idea I was going with the 1322 and stuff like that was sort of looking at the previous chapter titles with Luffy that he's fought the other East Blue crew members, okay? So, let's first look at Luffy versus Zoro, alright? This happened in chapter 112, okay? Then you move on to Luffy versus Usopp, right? Which happened in chapter 332, okay? Next, we have Luffy versus Sanji, which happened in chapter 844, right? Now, interesting enough here, if you basically look at the crew members in terms of when they joined Luffy, right? So, for instance, chapter 112 has 2 11s. Now, this can also be a reference to Zoro's birthday and also the month that he was born, right? November 11th. However, he was the first Straw Hat to join Luffy's crew, okay? Then, if you look at Usopp, Usopp was the third to join Luffy, all right? And his chapter has 2 3s, all right? Now, yes, in terms of like the number 3, Nami is usually associated with the number 3 in some regards, okay? However, if you're not counting Luffy and you're going by each crew member in terms of like joinment, Zoro would be first, Nami would be second, Usopp would be third, and Sanji would be fourth, okay? And Sanji has 2 4s in his chapters, okay? Which really got me thinking here is that if Nami was to have a fight with Luffy, then her chapter title, or the chapter title where they could fight, would include 2 2s, right? 2 22s, so 22 basically, not 2 22s, 22 or 2 2s, okay? And just like with Luffy and, like the chapters with Zoro and Usopp, the 2 numbers, or 11, is at the beginning of the chapter title, and the same thing with chapter 332, the 2 3s is at the beginning of the number. However, with Luffy versus Sanji, the 2 4s, 44, is after the 8, okay? And originally, I was also thinking for the Luffy versus Nami fight, 1,322, the 22 could be at the end of it, okay? That was originally what I was suggesting, okay? However, I have another idea on when they could actually fight, right? A chapter that could actually come beforehand, and yet the 22 is not going to be after or at the end or even before, but in the middle instead, okay? So what I would like to propose is that a chapter that I think they could actually fight, all right? The fight that could actually occur, and I have 2 chapter tiles, all right? So these are the 2 chapter tiles I would like to basically suggest on when Luffy and Luffy and Nami could actually fight, okay? So chapter 1223 or chapter 1224, okay? Those are my suggestions, all right? I might actually go with the 1224, or only because, just like with the Luffy versus Zoro and Luffy versus Usopp fight, both of them ended in 2, and yet this would be a good way for like the Luffy versus Sanji and Luffy versus Nami fight to both end on the chapters with the number 4, okay? However, I do think 1, 2, 2, 3 could also be a good way to really connect to Nami in a sense, or basically maybe both chapters can be officially like connect in a way, all right? Like maybe one could basically lead into the other, all right? You have basically like a really dedicated chapter to both these characters together, okay? All right. So that's one thing and all like that. And you're probably all wondering stuff like that. Well, what really reasons do you have to say that they're actually going to fight, right? Well, in reality, no real big reason to actually point and say that, oh, they're going to have a dedicated fight, right? But really look at any one thing to look at when you actually look at the fights to how Luffy fought with the other Straw crew and basically get an understanding of how they're actually going to fight. And I basically wrote them down, and we'll probably get an understanding here, okay? All right. So let's look at how the fights basically occurred with the other East Blue crew members, okay? So with Luffy versus Zoro, the fight was more of a misunderstanding, all right? So the whole fight basically came in as a misunderstanding, okay? So if you all remember, or the whole event happened during the Whiskey Peak arc, okay? And during the times like that, there were like those bounty hunters like that who offered them food. Luffy had basically assumed that Zoro had basically betrayed him and ended up attacking those good people, and yet Luffy was a complete idiot who completely misunderstood the situation and actually went up against Zoro and attacked him because he thought that Zoro had betrayed him, right? So, I mean, yes, in some regards, it was Luffy being a complete idiot, but at the same time, it was a complete misunderstanding, okay? Then you look at the Luffy versus Usopp fight, right? That whole fight basically led to a disagreement, okay? So, Luffy and everyone was all in agreement and that the Merry could not go on and that they needed to move on and get a new ship, right? However, Usopp did not want to actually agree with this, right? Usopp even challenged Luffy for the rights to be captain and like that, to make a decision to save the ship, right? And basically, it just led to a whole disagreement, right? And then the fight with Luffy versus Sanji, there's probably a few good things, but I would have to say it really led to a refusal, right? And the reason for that is that both of them, in a way, refused the other's option for what they wanted, right? So Luffy basically refused Sanji's request to leave Whole Cake Island and then find a new cook, all right? And at the same time, you could say that Sanji also refused Luffy's request to come and join him, because he had more of a personal matter and he felt like he needed to take care of this himself, okay? So both of their fights basically led to them refusing the other's refusal, right? So that's basically how it came down, which I would like to suggest that I could also see Luffy versus Nami fight coming in, but basically coming in on one single word, right? Like coming up with a single word that can describe why they are fighting, okay? And I'll get into that a little bit later because there's something else I want to go over, right? So what I would like to basically sum right here is this, all right? So I think there could be a specific reason on why, basically to say this, is that I think there could be a specific reason on why Oda chose to have Nami have a sword and Luffy for an axe, right? Because I think this could actually symbolize something very important here, right? And I think it might actually symbolize an attack that maybe these two are going to have against each other, right? All right. So, and interesting enough, one idea on why Oda chose an axe for Luffy and a sword for Nami is probably this. It's probably more of a callback or more of a reference to their attacks, okay? However, in reality, when you really look at it, it more or less references Luffy more than Nami and stuff like that. So basically, to sum it up, right? So if you look at Luffy's attacks in the past and stuff like that, he actually has a few axe name attacks, okay? So let's go over his axe name attacks, okay? So the first one we are ever introduced to is the Gum Gum War Axe, right? Or in some translations, it's called the Battle Axe. Okay, this is basically done in his gear first form, or like that, his base form. And it's the same one that he used to defeat, why am I Arlong? I don't know why I was getting ready to slip on Arlong. It was the same one that he used to defeat Arlong. Not to mention, we also saw Luffy practicing this technique in one of Kuma's flashbacks. Okay. The second one will be in Gear Second, which is Gum Gum Jet Axe. Okay, and then in Gear Third, we have Gum Gum Giant's Axe, but we also have another Gear Third version, which was introduced in Strong World, right? Gum Gum Giant Thor Axe, right? And oddly enough, Gear Fourth and Gear Fifth, as far as we are aware of, do not have any axe name attacks, all right? So Gears 1, 2, 3 are the only ones to have an axe name attack, okay? And oddly enough, because we are an Elbat Alpha, all right, maybe there could be a situation or an idea that we are finally going to get to see maybe Luffy used Giant Thor Axe in the actual manga, right? Maybe it will actually be utilized in the manga way, especially with Elbaf, right? And, Loki being the Prince of Giants, and yet Thor being a brother of that, right? So maybe this could be a good way to tie that in. And then you look at Nami, right? So Nami was basically given a sword in the most recent chapter, and yet even though she doesn't have like a lot of sword attacks, she does have one, right? She does have one attack that has the name sword in it, right? And that is her Gust sword, right? Which is basically used for sorcery climb attack on the first model, right? It's the first time she ever uses this was during the Fishman Island arc when the Stars were going up against the Fishmen. Luffy was fighting Hody and stuff like that, and she was going up against other Fishmen, right? And I believe she used it one more time again in Punk Hazard, okay? But she does have a technique that uses this title sword in it, okay? And to further add on this, I also think that Luffy and Nami's weapons could also symbolize a fight very similar to how Dory and Broggy, right? I believe that this could also be a parallel to Dory and Broggy in some ways. Maybe not like 100%, but enough to basically see something, all right? So at the beginning of the most recent chapter, right, we basically find out that Dory and Broggy really only came back to basically get themselves new weapons, all right? Because their weapons had broke, and Oimo and Kashi had basically stated, hey, you guys are not going to be able to win this fight, but your bare fists alone, all right? You guys need weapons, okay? So they convinced them to come back and get new weapons, okay? And interesting enough, when you look at Dory and Broggy each fight with a sword and axe respectively, okay? So Dory, his weapon is the Terry sword, okay? Broggy, his weapon is the Bruiser axe, okay? So both of them fight with an axe and a sword, okay? And this really gets me a general idea on the fact that Oda chose Nami to have a sword and Luffy for an axe. Now, yes, I will point out that I am aware that in the manga itself, there were a few crazy panels where Oda accidentally gave Luffy a sword and stuff like that, and yet it's a crazy situation where Nami's sword kept disappearing and coming back. It's like, yeah, I feel like that's pretty normal in a sense. Like, mistakes happen, so that's how I basically view it. It's just a mistake. Like, I don't really think Oda is basically trying to confuse us, because reality is, if I wanted to actually make people think that something confusing was going on, I wouldn't do something so completely obvious as that, all right? Like, because that could be really read as simple mistakes. It doesn't actually make a lot of sense, right? Just because, like, I mean, like, if say for instance, if like in one panel, Nami has like her crap, I'm forgetting what it's called. The thing that she uses to detect the islands and stuff like that. I'm forgetting the name of it, all right? But say, for instance, in one panel you see it, but in the next panel that you see her, it's gone, but yet in the panel after that, it finally comes back, right? So really to say that something's fishy going on is really more of just like, hey, Oda just forgot to add it in, okay? It's as simple as that. All right. So what I said before about describing Luffy and Nami fighting based on one word, okay? And yet this one word that I believe could actually work is this, all right? And I have 3 different options, all right? So the first one I would like to basically discuss is this, on how Luffy and Nami can fight. The first one is betrayal, all right? Could Nami betray Luffy once again? I don't think so. And I don't want this to be the option on how they actually come down and fight, okay? But I feel like it might be important to just say it just for the sake of it, okay? Maybe one idea you can look at is maybe Nami will actually fall in love with Loki, right? If the whole rumors and ideas are true that Loki is going to fall in love with Nami and ask for her hand in marriage, maybe Nami will actually fall in love with Loki and actually marry him and actually betray Luffy and abandon his dreams like that and just give it up just for the sake of money. I don't think so, and I would be very disappointed in Nami and stuff like that, and I would literally describe her as being the worst character of all time if she just went through that, okay? But I don't think that's the case, but I just wanted to actually say it, just to say that, hey, yes, I actually added in betrayal, but I don't think that's the option. The second thing I would like to add is determined, okay? Could Nami be determined to fight Luffy to prove something, right? Say, like, for instance, like, could an example could be like, say, like, you want to prove that you are strong enough to fight your own battles, right? Or you want to, like, prove that I can protect you just like you can protect me, right? Something like that. Yeah, it's more like trying to prove something and basically being determined and to show it, okay? However, the third one I believe is probably my favorite one of all, and it's the one I really think that is probably most important here, and that is a promise, right? And I really think that this one is really something that could actually be narrated very well into the story that could lead to Luffy and Nami fighting against each other, is because of a promise, right? Now you're probably wondering, how could a promise be used to make a fight, right? How could a promise be led to them fighting, all right? Well, think of a situation where Luffy and Nami being forced to fight to save a broken promise or a promise from breaking, right? So when it comes to Luffy, when you look at any kind of arc where Luffy is basically saving someone, all right, he always makes a promise, all right? It's always a part of him, all right? And Luffy even gets mad when other people make promises and they stumble over them or break them for their own personal gain or reason and don't even respect them, right? When it comes to promises, Luffy is very, very important on that matter, okay? And Luffy always does his best to keep his promise, right? And everything that Luffy comes to, he always keeps his promise, all right? Luffy has made promises before to a lot of people in the past, and yet even to this day, he's still got to keep those promises, okay? One instance could be Shirahoshi, all right? Luffy made a promise to Shirahoshi that he would allow her to actually come up on land and bring her to see a forest, okay? You could also see the situation where Luffy promised Ginzo, right? Luffy basically promised that he would never let Nami's smile be taken away. He promised Ginzo that, right? Luffy always does his best to keep his promises, right? And if you remember, before Luffy awakened as the Sun God Nika, it's like that, before Luffy awakened his Gear Fist, you get that moment where Nami is basically standing up to Kaido and basically refusing and telling him off. You get that moment where Nami is basically talking to Luffy, not like in a more direct way like that, but it's like she's basically telling us to remind us that Luffy, you need to keep your promise, right? You need to keep your word. Is the same as saying you need to keep your promise, right? You promised Wano, you promised Momo that you would save them, right? You promised, right? And at the same time, she's also reminding Luffy in that regards is that, hey, you promised us that you would take Shirahoshi to land in order to see the forest, right? Once again, same thing with Ginzo, right? You promised Ginzo that you would not let my smile be taken away, right? And if Luffy was to die in that moment, then Nami would be very devastated and sad, right? She would be very sad, and her smile would be taken away. And that could actually lead to something where maybe something actually occurs, and yet either Luffy or Nami, depending on the situation, one of them will have to go up against each other in order to save a promise from breaking, okay? Alright. So, I've talked before 100 times that I really think there's a good idea that Nami will basically have a Devil Fruit power, right? I know a lot of people out there don't want her to have a Devil Fruit power, and I'm okay with that, okay? And personally, I also agree that she doesn't necessarily need one, alright? I mean, she does pretty well with Zeus, so I am in agreement that she doesn't need one, but I do think Oda does have plans to have her have a Devil Fruit, right? And I think she will be the one with the missing 2-9, okay? And I know some people think that Vivi will get the Niku Niku no Mi and things like that, and yes, I can agree with that statement and basically see it as a possibility, but reality is, one reason on why I wouldn't want that to occur is because of the idea of what it could actually mean and what it could be doing to Bonnie in that sense, right? Bonnie is a 12-year-old girl, right? And you really have to ask yourselves, is like, we all know that the idea of that in order for Devil Fruits to be given to someone else, a previous user must die, right? Are we really wanting that, okay? Are we really wanting Kuma to die just for the sake of Vivi having a Devil Fruit power because her original ancestor had it before? I don't think so. I don't think that's how it should be, and I would feel very, very sad for Bonnie and like that after going to the whole trouble of risking everything and to save her father and being reunited with him, and just for a short amount of time, just for the sake of just for the sake to give Vivi a Delphi power, right? Which I think would be more important, right, for Nami to have a Delphi power that has no ties to the Niconomi in that regards, right? But maybe there'd be some similarities in terms of like power-wise or some unique things. But in reality, that's how I basically see it, right? And then again, it could be possible that Vivi will be the one to get this 2-9 Delphi, or that's completely separate. That's possible as well. All right. But here's basically going over the idea of why I think a new moon god could actually rise. Why there could actually be a new Delphi rising soon, or ability that will come up, okay? And that's basically because of this, all right? So let's look at the whole Binks Sake song, all right? Or particularly a good reason here, okay? So let's start with this verse right here, okay? So somewhere in the endless sky, a storm has started coming by. Waves are dancing, having fun. It's time to sound the drums. If we let blow winds of fear, then in the end of us is near. Even so, tomorrow the sun will rise again. I do apologize if I kind of got stuttered in that moment, okay? But the whole idea on this establishment right here is a good way to actually parallel or basically see a connection how Luffy rose as the sun god, all right? For instance, like, the whole idea of like, the waves are dancing, having fun, it's time to sound the drums. We basically heard the drums of liberation, all right? And yet, blow winds of fear, or the end of us is near. It's like that could be a way to establish Luffy holding in his breath, right? Trying to keep the breath inside of him from blowing out. And even so, tomorrow the sun will rise again. And yet, Luffy rose again and as the sun god, okay? Now, this is why I think another idea could establish of another deity coming into play, particularly a moon deity, all right? And think of it like this, all right? So listen very carefully, all right? Gather up all the crew. Time to ship out Binks brew. Could be today, could be tomorrow. Twilight dreaming. No longer we can now see shadow hands still waving free. Why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again, all right? Now, think of how we first sort of began the Elbaf arc, okay? How does it really begin, all right? With the Straw Hats partying and drinking on the ship, right? They're getting drunk, right? And yet, here you have a moment where it's saying, gather up all the crew, time to ship out Binks brew, okay? Now, yes, in the lyrics it's saying Binks brew, and yet in the whole manga itself, they're using a green fairy alcohol type, which I believe is referred as apis. I might have trouble saying that word like that, so I'm just going to stick with the whole green fairy, okay? All right? Could be today, could be tomorrow, twilight dreaming, all right? And think of the motion where Nami basically woke up and basically was asking herself, am I dreaming, okay? Could be today, could be tomorrow, twilight dreaming, right? And yet, Nami is basically, when she wakes up, she literally asks herself, am I dreaming, right? But that also brings into question, well, what about no longer can we now see shadow hands still waving free? Why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again, right? And I think that the beginning of the part of the chapters like that was literally going into like the first echo of the part, or it basically brings in the first part of the story, right? And yet, the no longer can we now see shadow hands still waving free, and why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again. I think will come towards the end of the chapter, towards the end of the arc, to be more precise. All right, so I should be very clear on that. Okay. And what I think could actually occur here is I have two options on something that could actually, a couple of options on how a fight could actually occur. So option number one, all right? As I mentioned before in one of the past Luffy versus Nami fights, we all know how Chopper's Rumble Balls, when he first utilized them to go into his Monster Boy form, he lost control, right? Maybe there could be a situation to where Luffy is going up against the bad guys like that, and yet he loses consciousness and goes in his like old man weak form. Okay, and maybe Nami will feel very very devastated or very heartfelt to this, and probably thinks to herself, well, if they manage to find out that Luffy is a zone type and like that, maybe Nami will think that giving one of Chopper's Rumble Balls will help him out. But yet it kind of backfires instead, and we get more of an out of control maniac nice Luffy, and yet Nami is forced to go up against him in order to save him, in order to remind him of who he is, in order to keep him from losing control and causing a destruction, right? And yet, basically, having people live in fear of knowing that their sun god, who they want to be utilized as their heroes like that, is basically being remembered or basically being seen as something else, right? And maybe Nami will feel more dedicated to this point, right? To basically fight to save something that she caused, and yet would probably feel more dedicated to actually saving Luffy because of something that she actually did, all right? And not something that she did on purpose, something that she wasn't actually expecting to happen, all right? And yet the same thing could be said for Nami in a sense, right? If the whole idea that I would like to assume or basically predict that Nami does get a Delph for Earth, and then maybe she feels like she needs to get stronger so that she will take one of the Realm Elves and lose control herself, and then maybe that could be a good way to establish a giant Nami in a sense, right? For how like Oda introduced the whole idea of giant Nami and stuff like that, maybe that could be a good way to actually realize it, all right? Some way to actually give a unique proportion of it, okay? That is something I would like to suggest, all right? Doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be true, but I figured it could be important. So that's why I actually think that the whole idea that no longer can we now see shadow hands still waving free, all right? And yet, how do shadows actually come in, all right? Shadows are basically coming in when light, when certain objects block light, all right? Whenever, so for instance, it's, I mean, you probably can't really see it yet, but because my hand is actually like blocking the light that's coming off, it's creating a shadow effect, all right? Shadow hands still waving free, it's like that. And then why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again. And yet, I know some people actually think that the idea that the moonlit light is symbolizing evil, but yet the lyrics themselves, when you really look at the lyrics, they don't really describe the way of saying like, you know, why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again. It doesn't really give the impression that it's like, why worry? You're still going to be in suffering when the moon comes up, right? Like the song basically is sort of utilized in a way of basically saying, hey, don't give up, don't worry, and say that at tomorrow or another chance will come, and yet you must not give up hope, right? It really is more of like giving an impression and that you shouldn't give up hope, right? That, you know, the sun will rise, moonlit will come, and yeah, we won't be cast in darkness, okay? And stuff. Because even when the sun goes down, and yet we need the moon to shine the light, right? We need moon to help shine light even in darkness, right? So whenever the sun is out, the moon must come up, right? And I feel like this could be important to basically say that, hey, the sun god has risen, all right? The sun god has risen again. And yet, now we get a moment here where yet is saying, why worry? There's sure to be moonlit night again, all right? So a moonlit night again, which means a way to describe that, yes, the moon goddess will rise again, all right? A moon goddess will come again. Or moon god in a sense, okay? So I think that's basically everything to really discuss, right? I think that's everything to really go over on my predictions and my thoughts for Luffy versus Nami, right? So to basically re-say again on a few moments, if I'm really going to have to predict a chapter number, it would have to be 1,123 or 1,120. Sorry, let me say that again. 1,223 or 1,224. But I would still like to consider the 1,322 as a possibility as well. So that's not actually canceling out anything. And then I would also like to basically also make a suggestion, and that, you know, I could actually see a very unique idea, you know, that we're going to get a new axe name attack from Luffy, and probably in one of his Gear 5th forms, all right? So, and it could be possible we might get in Gear 4th, because Gear 4th and Gear 5th, as far as we know of right now, don't have any axe name attacks. So I could actually see a brand new axe name attack coming in. So yeah, I could actually see something like that coming in. All right. So that's basically it, all right? That's everything I really wanted to discuss, everything to really go over. If you liked the video, anything I had to say and offer, or anything at all, please feel free to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit notification bells, do whatever you feel like you need to, all right? If you have anything to say about the videos like that, or anything on your thoughts and opinions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below, all right? Once again, you'll have a great day, hey, and then... Alright everybody, before we end off the video, this is the last thing we need to do. So remember at the beginning of the video, I told you guys, if you had a sword, you were automatically Team Nami. If you have an axe, then you are automatically Team Luffy, right? So for those who have a sword, please raise your swords and say, Go Nami! And yet, if you have an axe, then raise your axe up high and say, Go Luffy, alright? Alright, so, you know what to do. Goodbye, the end.